So just like the flow triggers, so in Apex also we have triggers. Okay, so triggers will fire whenever the record is updated, auto inserted and deleted and undeleted. So different events. So they will fire in Apex. Okay, so why we will use Apex trigger? So the simple is, so we want to automate the business, right? Business process. So for that we will use the Apex triggers. So when we have to use these Apex triggers, so when it is not, the task is not achievable in the flow triggers, so then only we have to go for the Apex triggers. Okay, because every line or every character will be counted by the Salesforce. Okay, so to reduce the number of characters in the code, so we have to use out of the box features, that is flow. Okay, when it is not achievable in the flow, so we have to go for the Apex triggers. Okay, so here, so we have different flow Salesforce Apex trigger events. So that is before insert and before update, before delete. So before means when data is not saved to the database. Okay, okay. When if you create, for example, so we are trying to create a account record. Okay, for the account record I have given the account name. So I'm with account name I am trying to create an account record. So before it is saving to the database, so it is considered as before insert. Okay, so when I'm using the insert DML action, so before it's saved to the database, so it checks the data or something validity. So that scenario is called before insert scenario. And like this, so for the before update, when the data is not saved to the database, so we want to check the validity of the data and some other actions. Okay, so that is scenario, this scenario called so before update scenario. Okay, that is when data is not saved to the database. Okay, for the delete also, so when it is not deleted in the database, so before the deletion we have to check something. So like these scenarios will got before scenarios. Okay, after scenarios. So after scenarios means the data is saved in the database. After saving the data in the database, we want to perform some actions. Okay, like based on the account record value, so we want to create a contact record, or we want to create a lead record, we want to create some other record. So these type of actions called after scenario action. So for every data manipulation method, so we have before and after scenarios. Okay, so right, delete and undelete same. So we have two types of scenarios here for every method of DML. So before and after scenarios. So let's come to the syntax of the trigger. So we will write a trigger using the trigger keyword, trigger and trigger name, on which object we are writing. Okay, so we'll specify that object. So for example, let's take I'm writing a trigger on account object. So what should I write? Trigger. Okay, trigger name like account trigger on account object. Okay, event. So the events are before insert, before update, delete. So we have to specify the events for that trigger. For example, I'm writing the before. So I want to validate the data which is coming from the user to create an account. So for that scenario, I will take before insert scenario, before insert event. Okay, before insert, and I will use this curly braces. Whatever the code I will write in the trigger, so I will write here. Logic. So This is how we will write a trigger. Okay. This is how we will write a trigger. Understood? Okay. And next slide. So there are some trigger context variables. Without this context variables, we can't do in the anything in the trigger. So what are the context variables? For example, so these are provided by the Salesforce itself, Apex Salesforce inbuilt Salesforce itself. So there are record collection variables and record map variables and event variables, event type variables, and execution timing variables and execution context info variables. Okay. For example, if you go to the record collection variables, trigger.new and trigger.old. So what is trigger.new? When a record is going to be created, okay, going to be created or updated and undeleted. Okay, so in these scenarios, we have the new data is coming to the database, right? So the new data will get using this trigger.new collection. This is a list of records. So list of records and trigger.old. So when record is going to be updated and deleted, so we can have the old data, right? So there is if we want to update a record, so for some field, for the name field, I want previously it was existing ABC. I want to update it to XYZ. Okay, the ABC is the older version of the value and XYZ is the newer version of the variable. So to get the older version of variable, so ABC, so I will use trigger.old. Okay, to get the newer version of the values of the record, so I will use trigger.new. Okay, and map variable. So trigger.new map and trigger.old map. This is same, but it is a type of map. Okay, type of map. It contains ID and record here. So this is ID of Salesforce ID of that record, which is going to be updated or deleted, something. So any action. Okay, and trigger.old. This is the same thing, ID and record. It collects it holds the ID and record. Okay, and event variables. So there are events, right? Insert, update, delete, and undelete, 4 types of events, right? So to get that event, so I want to check whether the record is going to be inserted or updated and deleted or deleted or undeleted. So using this variable, this event type, so I will be able to check whether this is insert event or whether this is update event and whether this is a delete event and whether this is the undelete event. I will check using this event type variables. Okay, and execution timing. So is it going to be in the before event or is it in the after event? That is it happening before the data is saved to the database or after the data is saved to the database? So I can able to check using this execution timing variables. Okay, execution context info variables. So trigger dot is execute. When I want to check in the code and Apex, so if the trigger is running, okay, whether the trigger is running or not running, so I can able to check using this trigger dot is executing variables. Okay, and this trigger dot size, I can able to check the number of records triggered per a triggered scenario, a trigger context. So when a record is updated or deleted, how many number of records has been affected? Okay, that can able to check using this trigger dot size. And see here, if you observe this image, okay, image. So this is an account trigger, right? So before update scenario. So So we are using trigger dot is update and trigger dot is before. It means that, so it is before the data is saved on the record update. Okay, the condition says before the data is saved to the database on the update event. Update event. And trigger dot new, so it holds the new values of the updated update the record, so newer version of the values, that is what is the user is updated on the record. And trigger that old map, so trigger that old map that new account dot id. So we are passing an id, right, for a map. Okay, so it will get the okay, so we are passing an id, right? So it will get the old version of the record of a account. Okay, it will get the old version of the account record. Okay, and see here, and these context variables, in which scenario it is available and in which scenario is not available, they mentioned here. So old trigger dot new will be available when a record is inserted, because new values, right? Whether we want, whether if you want to update a record, so we can get the new values. Or if we want to insert a new record, we can get new values, right? And if we want to undelete a record also, we can get the new trigger dot new values, because it is saving to the database. New values is saving to the database, right? So in this scenario, we can get the trigger dot new. And trigger dot old, trigger dot old, when we can get, so when we want to update a record or delete a variable, delete a record. So in these two scenarios, we can get trigger dot old. And map also same. So trigger dot new map. So when we update, we can get the record ID and map. So in undelayed scenario, we can't get the trigger dot new map. Why? So the ID is, okay, the ID is, so we are delete the ID is, in the trigger dot new map, the id is, okay, it is existing, but it is in the recycle bin. So just we are making it to is deleted equal to true. Just we are not inserting any new record, just we are making the is delete equal to true. That's why we can't get the map here. Okay. And trigger dot old map, in the trigger dot old map, update and delete scenarios, we can get the trigger dot old map. Okay, and the key things is, so just we discussed, right, in trigger dot old new scenario, whenever the new data inserted into the database, so we can get the trigger dot new. So trigger dot old, so whenever we compare the old and new to old map, so use it to compare, this is used to compare new and old versions of recorder values. Okay, trigger dot is update, so to identify whether the is update DML accessing is happening or not. Okay, so we have to use every time we have to use loops to on these variables, context variables, to to use this record values. Okay, so just like we have used in for loop, right, for the on trigger dot new. So likewise, so we have to use loops to access every record of this list. Okay, అండర్స్టూడ్? అర్థమైందా? హలో, అర్థమైందా? అర్థమైందా? కన్ఫ్యూజింగ్ ఉందా?
కన్ఫ్యూజింగ్
ఉంది కదా, అట్లా ఉంటుంది. మనం ఒక ఎగ్జాంపుల్ రాస్తే, సో ఈజీగా చెప్పాలంటే మీకు, మనం ఇంతకుముందు ఫ్లో ట్రిగర్స్ రాసాం కదా, when a record is created and update. So likewise, this trigger events, okay, when a record is before insert, so when a record is going to be inserted, and when a record is going to be updated in the database. Okay, సో మనం ఫ్లోలో చూసాం కదా. ఫర్ ఎగ్జాంపుల్ వెన్ ట్రిగర్ సినారియోస్ సెలెక్ట్ చేస్తాం కదా మనం ఫ్లో క్రియేట్ చేసేటప్పుడు, ట్రిగర్ ఫ్లో క్రియేట్ చేసేటప్పుడు. సో వెన్ రికార్డ్ ఈస్ క్రియేటెడ్ అండ్ వెన్ రికార్డ్ ఈస్ క్రియేటెడ్ అండ్ అప్డేటెడ్, లైక్ దెన్ హియర్ వి విల్ యూజ్ దిస్ ట్రిగర్ ఈవెంట్స్. ఓకే, అర్థమవుతుందా? అర్థం కాకపోతే చెప్పండి, ఇది ఇంపార్టెంట్ టాపిక్. హలో, మాట్లాడండి బాస్, లేకపోతే మీకు అర్థమైందా తెలియదు, అర్థం కాలేదా తెలియదు. ఎగ్జాంపుల్స్ ఉన్నాయి దాంట్లో, నేను చెప్తాను ఎగ్జాంపుల్స్. బట్ ఈ థియరీ అయితే అర్థమైందా మీకు? ఓకే, ఓకే, let's discuss again. Okay, apex triggers means when a record is inserted, updated and deleted and undeleted. That means when a record, the data is new data is entered into the database or delete from the database, so this apex triggers will fire. Okay, ఇది అర్థమైందా మీకు? Okay, so when we want to create a data in the database or update a data in the database, or when we want to delete the data in the database, or when we want to undelete the data in the database, so at that time these apex triggers will fire. Okay, okay, why we will use these apex triggers? To automate the business logic. Okay, like flows, Salesforce flows. Okay, or we want to validate the data before entering into the database. Okay, and if you want to enforce the data, some rules on the data, and if you want to do some actions based on the data, so at that time we will use this apex triggers. So the same task we can able to do with the flows also, but some out of the box features will not support in the flows. So that's why we will use apex triggers. Okay, okay, when the feature is not supported by the Salesforce, so we will go to the apex triggers. Okay, so there are trigger events, two types of events, before and update. For each data DML actions we have two events. Okay, before and update, except the undelete. Okay, okay, because for undelete, before undelete, there won't be an event. Okay, so the basic syntax is here. We will write trigger name on which object we are going to write a trigger, so we will mention that object. Likewise, give an example, right? Trigger, account trigger on account object, we will mention the trigger events are before insert, or before update, or before delete, and after insert and after update. after delete, after undelete, like that. So we can mention the events here in this parenthesis. Okay, and in the curly braces we will write the logic. Okay, let's see here in the example. So we are writing a follow-up task trigger on the account. Okay, on after insert. Okay, so it runs after an account is inserted. See here we are checking trigger dot is after and trigger dot is insert.
Insert.
Okay, trigger dot is insert, we are checking, right? So that makes sure that run after the account is created. So here checking the event context. uh, what is the event type we are checking? Trigger dot is after. So after the data is saved to the database, and this is the event trigger dot is insert. Is it an insert event? The data is inserted into the database or not? Okay, and we are creating a task, follow up task after inserting the record, and we are creating a follow up task. Task equal to new task. What ID is called account ID, and subject is a follow up and account name. Due date equal to date. Heroes day 1 day extra, and owner ID is equal to account owner ID, and inserting the task. So just this is a simple example for the after scenario event. Insert after scenario. Okay, after the data insertion, so we are creating the task. Okay, అర్థమైందా example? Hello.
Hello. Yeah, bro.
అర్థమైందా?
Yeah, bro.
Okay, so let's discuss the context variable in depth. Okay, just we discussed, right? What are the context variables? So Apex has given some variables to determine what is the event, what is the type, and what are the records available on the events. Okay, record collection and record maps, and whether the trigger is running it in the code, how we can detect. So the Salesforce has provided some context variable, trigger context variables. So this is the important topic in interviews also they will ask. Okay, what are the trigger context variables and what they are, when we will use, and what context variables are available, what scenarios, in what scenarios we will use, they will ask in the interviews. Okay, so trigger events. So we have 4 events, right? Insert, update, delete, and undelete. Okay, and trigger timings, 2 timings, before and after. So before the data is saved, and after the before the data saved to the database, and after the data saved to the database. Okay, so access to the record. To determine these things we will use context variable. What is the trigger event and execution time, and to access the record data. For these 3, so we will use the context variables. So for the record data, so there are record collections and record maps. To determine the event, we will use trigger dot is insert, is update, and is delete, is undelete. So we will use this event type boolean flags to determine whether it is, so whether it is insert event or update event or delete event or undelete event. Okay, and execution timing, is it before data saved to the database, after the data saved to the database. Okay, we'll use trigger dot is before and is trigger dot is after to determine that. Then execution context. Okay, execution context. So whether the trigger is running, so we will check with the trigger dot is executing. Okay, it returns boolean. Okay, when trigger is running, so it will return the true. Trigger is not running, so general apex is running, so it will return false. And trigger dot size, the number of records in a trigger context, so we will use this trigger dot size. Understood, right? Okay, so if
Yeah,
you
bro.
come to this example, account record on account. So we are determining the action here. Trigger dot is update. Okay, we are checking whether it is an update event or not. Okay, and what context, before context or after context. We are checking trigger dot is before here. Okay, and account trigger dot new. So we are accessing the values here, record values here, trigger dot new. Okay, with trigger dot new, it is a list, and trigger dot new map is a map containing id and record, and trigger dot old map dot get here. So we are using the map to get the old version of the record by passing an id, that is key. Okay, so here in the below table, so we are check, so it is mentioned, so when the context variables are available. Okay, trigger dot no is available in the insert and update and undelete, because the new data is coming to the database. And trigger dot old, so when it will be available in the update and delete, we will have trigger dot old records. And trigger dot new map in the update, so we'll have trigger dot new map. Okay, and trigger dot old map. So in the trigger dot new map, why other scenarios not exist? Because the id will not be there in the other scenarios. In the maps, we are using an id for the key, so that's why the other scenarios is not available for this new map. Okay, trigger dot old map. Okay, insert and so in the update and delete, will have trigger dot old map. Okay, understood? అర్థమైందా? Okay. And best practices. Okay, so every time we should write only one trigger per one object. Okay, for example, for account object, we need to write only one trigger. In a bulkification, right? So we need to write for loops, and to process the bulk data, we need to write use for loops. Okay, and avoid SQL and DMLs in the for loops. Okay, and use the collections. This trigger collections is there, right? And to map those data, we have to use sets collection list to improve the performance and bulk record processing. So, and trigger handler pattern also we have to use. Okay, and we have to prevent the recursions also in the triggers. Okay, because multiple for example, there are two records. If one record is updated, okay, the same field, okay, will fire the trigger. Okay, and same record in the triggers, we are updating the same field, and then it caused the trigger to fire again. So this will result the recursion, that is, so it will cyclically, so that is again and again the trigger will fire. So this is called a recursion. Okay, so we have to make sure that recursion should not happen using the boolean flag. Okay, boolean flag. So we will see the examples also. So just we will stick theory for this class, and in the next class we will work on the examples. Okay, we will for all the scenarios we will execute the trigger examples. Okay, and And so unnecessary updates we have to, so there are some best practices. Okay, so we have to use before and update context scenarios correctly. And so, okay, we have to use we have to use single line triggers, and we have to use trigger handler patterns, trigger controller, like that. So some best practices we need to use uh, to not hit the governor limits. Okay, so we'll see the trigger handler pattern also. So this is a trigger handler pattern. Okay, so see here, account trigger. In the trigger we have only single line, so this line will call the handler class. So in the handler class we will write the all the code. So we have to maintain a single line trigger every time. So that is the best practice. Okay, and we have to use multiple helper classes and event based handler. Okay, and we can these are the different types of trigger framework patterns. Okay, so we will see one example for each uh, pattern. Okay. Mm, okay, so as of now, is there any doubts in today's class? So we'll execute programs tomorrow in tomorrow's class for each and every trigger concept. Is there any doubts?
No problem.
No,
Meena?
sir.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, then we'll wrap up today.
So the